I'm JJ Heller, and this is Instrumental, a show about the big and small moments that shape our lives. In every episode, my guest and I start near the end of their story and work our way back to the beginning. I hope our conversation reminds you that every second matters, because none of us knows which moment will be the one that changes everything.
Big love happens in the small moments.
Hey everybody, it's JJ.
It's Dave.
Our guest this week is someone who I've spent hours and hours with. But I haven't actually heard much of her story until now because I was the one who was busy talking about my own life.
But you're such a good listener most of the time, JJ.
I know it was a unique situation because our guest this week is actually a counselor who I've known for years now.
What's her name?
Her name is Beth Barcus, and she works for a place called Porter's Call.
It's a beautiful old house in downtown Franklin, Tennessee, where artists find a safe place to talk about the unique challenges and obstacles that come with a career in the spotlight.
I've shared openly about my journey with anxiety and panic, and the counselors there at Porter's Call have been helping me process all of that since 2007.
So today is a unique opportunity to turn the tables on.
Wow.
We are turning tables, guys.
Turning tables.
Tables will be turned. And the counselor is going to be in the hot seat doing the talking.
Bum.
This was a great conversation. So without further ado, let's get to know Beth.
Act 3, I'm Your Girl. After taking a break from her career to focus on mothering her children, Beth found herself ready to re-enter the job market. She envisioned herself using her previous counseling experience, but things didn't quite work out the way she thought they would.
I made a list. I kind of just did a dream list. And I was like, okay, where are the kind of places that do what I feel passionate about? Offer free care and where I could use my degree. And I had a list of one place.
Wow.
And of course, like Hope Clinic, there were a lot of other organizations, but I was like, I wanted in Franklin. And I want to see if there's some flexibility, but I don't know what Porter's Call was the only one. If I really prayed through it, I was like, it's just Porter's Call.
So you went down to write a list and you only
I
wrote one thing.
One name down. So I'm like,
Your list is 2 words.
We got it. Yeah, exactly. So I decided, I was like, okay, I'm going to reach out. I reached out to him by email, and he's like, sure, let's come in and have a meeting. Let me see what's on your mind. So I was like, so here's the thing. Here's my resume. Just curious if you're interested in hiring part-time. I was thinking a part-time counselor because in my mind, I was like, I'm a mom first and foremost. I don't want to commit full-time.
Yeah, and you have a toddler at home.
At that time, I had a 3-year-old. Yeah. And he was like, we just don't think we're at a place where we can hire anybody. And my schedule is such that I can see everybody within a week or 2. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. That's a bummer, but maybe it's just not time. And
Yeah, I mean, like, how did that feel to get that no?
it was more of like, maybe it's just not the time. And maybe I need to expand my list to more than one. Maybe I don't need to be so narrow-minded. And for some reason, 6 months later, I decided to write another email. Like, how annoying is that?
No,
and
it's persistent.
It is persistent.
Yes.
But it's not really like me. I'm kind of more of a play hard to get, just don't be too desperate.
Yeah.
I'm good. But I just like, I don't know why, but I just feel like I need to circle back. And I was like, is there any chance that things have changed over there at the Porter's Call, home? And he goes, well, funny that you should call. He said, because things have changed. And Brooke, our current office manager, is going to move out to Washington with her husband because he's going to pursue his degree. I was like, wow, that's a lot of change in 6 months. He said, would you consider this position? I know that's not why you got your degree, but would you consider that? And I was like, well, I'll look at the job description. So I look at the job description. I'm like,
Secretary, basically.
yeah. I was like, I can do this, but that's not really why I went and got my degree, and that's not really what I was wanting to do. And it's full time.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of more of like a contract, counseling. So I said, but I just want to have a conversation. So we have a conversation, and I said, is there a possibility of it merging into more? where I could move into that. And he said, yeah, but I just can't guarantee the time frame. And I was like, yeah, I understand that. Because he said that because that would be us adding a whole nother staff member.
Yeah.
And if we don't, and that's more money for me to raise and all that. So I was like, okay, I understand that. Well, so I take the job. They offer me the job. I'm office manager for a year and a half, and I actually loved it because I like systems. I was a director of an organization, and I had, a staff and interns and a budget, and I loved it. I love that side of it too. And a year and a half in, I was finding myself getting a little bit like, wanting something different. I was like, I'm ready to be challenged. I think I'm ready to do this, but I didn't say anything because I was like, it's not my position to say anything. And he's sitting there by the desk at one point, and he's by this time booked out 6 weeks. He had gone to Gulu, Uganda to do some work with Bob Goff at the Restore Academy, and he came back and was like, wow, I'm 7 weeks deep. And he said, do you think this is the time? And I'm like, is he saying what I think he's going to say? Like, I'm like, oh, kind of giddy. And he was like, I was like, time for what? And he said, is it time for you to start counseling? I was like, I thought you'd never ask. That's when we started merging in. I started seeing like 3 clients a week and still doing this other part of the business. And then I'd start seeing 5 and I'd start building. And then it grew into me solely doing no more QuickBooks, no more of the director of operations kind of role, an office manager role. It was strictly counseling. And then we hired someone. It used to be that Al could see people and have a 1 or 2 week wait list. And now we have 2 people full time doing this work. And we both have, we're booked out sometimes 6-8 weeks.
Wow.
Both me and the
Yeah.
new porter. When I first started, it was probably 80% CCM, Christian music, and maybe 20% a mix of others. And now I want to say 60% are country.
Wow.
I would say 20% CCM, and the 10%'s rock and rap and R&B and other.
So does that mean like with country musicians come country record label budgets to kind of like help?
That has sometimes come up, but what's incredible about the organic growth of Porter's Call is the budget has grown organically through very spontaneous, unexpected, unplanned for donations. And that's really been through artists that have given back.
Wow.
I mean, if you want to see me cry really hard, it's when we got such a significant donation, I just thought it was a joke. Let's just suffice to say that it was the largest single donation by an individual we'd ever gotten, and it was by an artist that I'd done premarital work with.
How did you learn about it? Like,
Well, it just literally was wired to us.
really? So
And we
Just
had to
out
go.
of the blue?
Well, the individual came in first around Christmas time and handed a check that was very generous, and I was like oohing and ahhing and cooing over it and just saying thank you, gushing. And then this other one came in and we had to track it down because you got to report that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so we're like, who sent this money? And then we kind of found out and we tracked them down. We're like, what? And they're like, well, Merry Christmas. You've been a blessing.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, talk about waterworks. So it's just not expected, not solicited. It's the one demographic that we do not solicit.
Yeah.
We solicit labels and managers and the people that make money off of the artists, but we say to the artists, you are free to come and you have same access to us no matter what kind of your career
Income
looks like.
bracket. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just want to be a safe place for you to talk about whatever you want to talk about, knowing that there's zero cut that we're going to take and expect from you. And the one thing we ask is that you show up and get ready to do your work. The other thing we ask is that you hold in confidence if you see somebody here you recognize. And we do hope that you tell others the good news. And if you want to give back, we won't turn you down, but we don't even say that.
That's interesting. I've never really thought about that before, especially for artists working with labels. Everyone at the label, even if they're wonderful, they want the artist to succeed because that makes money for the label.
Right.
But how refreshing for that artist to come to Porter's Call knowing that you're not going to make any money off of them. You just want to invest in them because you believe in them and the work that they're creating.
Right.
What is the difference in counseling an artist versus counseling someone at a crisis pregnancy center?
When it comes down to the core of it, we really are all the same in what we deal with. It's just the timing of when we deal with it and our backstory. We all struggle with anxiety. We all struggle with depression at some level. We all, have our vices and our medicators and the ways that we numb and the ways that we have conflict and the ways that we hide, and we all have shame. And so it's those same themes. They just take on a different name each time because it's a different person that walks in. But this is the reason why I love working with artists. Several reasons. One, you're super honest. I'm looking right at JJ. Artists are they're honest. They're in touch with their feelings. They are vulnerable people. They're resilient people. They're innovative and creative, and they want to be the best version of themselves. And that is all you need to do good counseling work. And so we get to work with the subsection of people in the population that's like ready to do good work. But I would say you guys just it's challenging to be in this world where you're on a platform. Your vulnerability is on display. It's being measured. It's being graded. It's being monetized. And although that's all, and you have to do all that, it really can do a number on your soul because you're not built for fame, but you are built to create and you want to share that hope. So it's just an honor. It really is. It's such an honor. And I tell Al that we just celebrated. Al just had a birthday on May 19th, same day as my twins being born, which is so special. I was just telling him on his birthday, and we just wrote in a little card. I was just like, where would we be if you weren't born and if you didn't have the vision? Like, I wouldn't know the people I get to work with. I wouldn't know the staff. Like, all of the way this is all intertwined, it's just a really beautiful thing. And I just thank you for having this vision. Thank you for believing in me and to be the first hired porter alongside him. And I remember the first time I started taking on clients, I thought, oh my gosh, you've got the option of Al Andrews, who's the Al Andrews, and you've got the new girl. Let me think. I think I'll take Al. And what was so beautiful, even though there was just this kind of insecurity that was popping up, I was finding that God was just giving me exactly what I needed to hear. It was random people calling that didn't know Al. They just heard Porter's call, and there was 3 calls in a row that said, I really would like a female.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, God, I hear you.
I'm your girl.
Right. I was like, I believe I'm supposed to be here.
Wow.
You've made it really clear. I've doubted, but this will be okay.
Yeah.
I will be able to love on these people and give them what they need.
This is such a great example of being ready to use your gifting when the opportunity presents itself. Because most of the time, life doesn't play by your timetable. But more often than not, there are chances to make a difference if you're open to them, even if they don't quite look the way you thought that they would.
Yeah, I love that she was willing to just kind of be in a temporary position and ready to step into a great role that made sense for her. Well, before we hear Act 2 of Beth's story, we need to jump back in time to 2001. JJ, something very significant happened in 2001.
I went to West Valley Junior College.
I was thinking about that, but actually the longest English sentence ever written
Oh, well then.
in a book. It was printed in a novel called The Rotters Club.
Okay.
I haven't heard about that. I just found it on the internet, so
Excellent.
it must be true.
Must be true.
This sentence was 13,955 words long.
What?
Yes. And I'm going to read it for us now.
No, you're not.
All right.
On this special edition podcast that's 3 hours long.
I'm going to read a really long sentence.
No.
Well, I can guarantee you one thing.
Gravity?
No. Beth definitely didn't read that sentence.
In 2001?
Yes.
Because it didn't. Oh, you're right. It did exist. It
Right.
came into
It did
okay,
exist,
okay.
She was just busy living her life. Let's hear what was going on in 2001 with Beth.
Act 2, I'm still at work. Some of the best counselors are people who have experienced the full spectrum of life. That includes great joys and devastating losses. Let's hear about some of the events that helped Beth become who she is today.
And so we come to find out we get pregnant like right around 9/11, and we go for an ultrasound, and I'm 5 months along. And at this point, you go and they put the stethoscope up and they check and they're heart rate good, we're good. And so I'm just progressing, thinking all's well, with our baby. Singular. So we go for the ultrasound, and what's ironic is just right before we had lunch, and I was like, what would you do if we found out we were having twins?
What gave you that?
I
thought?
don't know. I have no idea, other than the fact that my dad's a twin.
Yeah.
But I was not that big at the time. And so he was like, I don't know. I think it would be kind of cool because I'm older. He was 35 at the time, 34. And we weren't going to find out boy or girl. We just wanted to be surprised. And I said, I'm ready to see our little one. She said, you mean 2? I was like, 2 feet? 2 hands? Like, yeah. And she's like, no, you don't know you're having twins? And
Whoa.
so the ultrasound tech was the first one to notice, obviously, because the doctors up until then didn't pick up on a second heartbeat. And my husband's like, yes. He's like, you just said that. Did you know? I was like, no, I didn't know. And so even though we didn't want to know boy or girl, I was like, I want to know. This is the time I want to know now. So we
Tell
found
me
out.
everything.
Mhm. So it was a boy and a girl. And so that was our firstborn. And what's crazy is the grandparents still talk about the story, because we're literally on our way home from the hospital and we're calling them going, you're not going to believe this. And my mom, she's so cute, full Japanese, full on accent, mama. I was like, Mom, you're not going to believe this. And I was like, because, my dad's a twin. And I was like, we're having twins. She's like, what? No. And I don't know if you know this about the Japanese language, but they don't have contractions. Like we say, I can't
Okay.
or shouldn't.
Okay.
It's no can.
No can.
Even though she's been here, 3 times longer than she lived in Japan, she still uses kind of that format because that's the way their grammar works.
Yeah.
She goes, Betty, can do that. And I was like, I'm doing it, Mom. And she just kept saying, can do that. Can do that. And I'm like, well, it's happening. Apparently I am. And I don't remember ever being stressed about it. I never got worried. And 3
Wow.
months later, we had these twins and never had a day of bed rest. But I look back on it now and I go, I know why my mom was so worried. And it's because she had her firstborn had, suffered cerebral palsy because of malpractice. Like it was basically he was breached, even though he was perfectly healthy in utero. He was in a breached position and he was delivering at the military hospital in Okinawa, Japan, which is my mom's hometown. But it was through the U.S. military hospital because my dad was a Marine, and they delivered him despite his breached position, and he suffered so much oxygen loss to his brain that he got severe brain damage. So he has cerebral palsy as a result of it. 6 years older than me, but my mom had pretty severe, birthing trauma. And so it made sense to me that, wow, I see why my mom got so, concerned.
When your mom was saying, can do that,
Yeah,
were you perceiving that?
not making a connection
Like, when
at
did you
all.
make that connection?
Probably when I had my miscarriage. Because I had had such a smooth 5 months, and because the rest of my pregnancy was so smooth, I really took it for granted. I mean, it's like you don't really know the suffering that you don't know and you've never experienced. And so I think it was just this sense of you get pregnant and happen. It's really naive and quite ignorant, in my opinion, now that I look back and go, that just was a very young perspective. And so I think I just took it for granted that that's what happens. And when I had my miscarriage, I think I just really felt the weight of, oh, we live in a broken, fallen world where things don't work as they should. And I do remember exactly, interesting that all of my pregnancies happen around some major
Trauma.
crisis.
Yeah, crisis.
So it was around Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
I talk pretty frankly. So I'll just say, I was like, I think I've missed my period. What do I do? I need to check this out. And my current day best friend, Holly, was like, well, I've got a test at home. You want me to bring it? I was like, yeah, I want to do that. I'm just can't believe that this is happening right now.
And how old were the twins
The
at this
twins
time?
were 2. So I took the pregnancy test. It was positive. And this was while we were working at a shelter for Katrina evacuees.
Wow.
Yes. And I just remember being like, when I saw the footage of Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, I was like, I've got to do something. And so at the time at Christ Community where I was going to church, we had the current day Franklin Mayor was a part of that church, and he's like, we're going to do something. We're going to build a shelter. He's like, do you want to be on the task force? I was like, yes, I want to do something. So we got to, help open the shelter. It was just right off of Columbia Avenue, and we started bringing people in, and we had to set up various things like, food and clothing and all that stuff, transportation. And so
Katrina victims somehow made their way to Franklin, Tennessee. And they ended up in this building that you were working on.
Right.
Okay.
I took the test. It was positive. And I remember being at the shelter every day. And then at some point I had to stop because I started bleeding. And I was like, okay. So I went to the doctor and they checked it. And they're like, we've got a heartbeat. The baby's the right size. And kind of predicted how far along I was. And I think at that point I was maybe about 8 or 9 weeks. So I stopped going to the shelter and had to go on strict bed rest.
Okay.
And how ironic that I carried twins and never had a day of bed rest.
Yeah.
And I'm 8 weeks pregnant and I'm on bed rest.
What was going through your mind when that happened?
Yeah, it was more, I think, I feel like oftentimes my first, if I can name an emotion, it's guilt. It's guilt. I'm like, what did I do? I was at the shelter too long. I did a weird yoga twist. But more than anything, I was like, I'll just do whatever I need to do. So I literally was on strict bed rest and made myself do it. And I had no problem doing that.
Did you share that feeling of guilt with your husband, or is it just kind of like an unspoken kind of internal thing?
Yeah, I would say at the time, I don't think I would have called it that. It
Yeah.
was just after really processing it after the fact.
Yeah.
I think at the time, all I did was just like, I know I need to be on bed rest and I'm just going to do this. But I think when I look back throughout various points in my story, I realize that that is typically my go-to emotion. So I would go in every week for checks and they would be like, interestingly enough, the baby's continuing to grow and the heart rate's still there and all is well, but I just kept bleeding. So I think this always seems to work is that your closest friendships tend to go deeper. Your roots go deeper when you go through something hard. And so my friend Holly, who gave me the pregnancy test, was calling me every day. We would talk for hours. And she had also experienced a miscarriage kind of later in a term, like 12 weeks.
Okay.
My husband's like, I don't know what to look for and what to ask for. And
Right.
I was like, yeah, I don't expect for you to know what this feels like. So we would go for these well checks, and there was a one night I got it all the way up to 12 weeks. So I thought, okay, we're close. Like we're almost, maybe it will turn. And I was hopeful. I definitely was hopeful because I was like, every time we go, they're saying the baby's growing, the heart rate's still there. Surely this will be okay. So I just kept feeling like if I just keep doing what I'm supposed to do, we'll turn the corner. And then it was one night, there was no denying. It was just breakout, full on, cold sweats, feverish, major contractions.
Oh,
I mean,
wow.
I did natural childbirth and it felt like that.
Whoa.
I mean, it was like, whoo. And so literally on the phone with my friend, and she's like, yeah, babe, I think it's happening. And so we go in the next day and it's just, here I'm looking at a screen of an empty womb.
Wow.
I mean, it was like contrast of something very clear that you're looking at on a screen, and then the next day it's gone. So it was a lot of grief, a lot of tears.
Had you encountered that kind of emotional pain like that before in your life?
I don't think anything that was as personal that had compared because I hadn't lost any close relatives. Yeah, that was probably a bigger at that moment in my life. I was 31, 32. That was a pretty big loss for me.
When you were talking about the guilt kind of feeling while you were on bed rest, was it kind of like I did what I could and
Oh no, I was covered in guilt. I mean, I was rethinking everything. I was truly rethinking. I remember exactly where I was when I did a certain yoga twist, and I wondered if that was it.
oh wow.
I mean, it's amazing. And then I thought I was just spending too much time in that shelter. I was, I should have been doing this or should have been doing that. Lots of shitting. I was like, boy, I did a good job of shitting all over myself. So it was definitely that was my immediate feeling. But over time, I think honestly, when some of those hormones kind of reacclimated, I was able to really get my head back on. I was like, okay, I know that wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
But it's really hard to tell yourself that when you're feeling it.
Yeah.
And I think that's been the theme that if I were to look at an emotion that I have to continue to move it in a healthy direction, it would be guilt.
Yeah. Do you feel like that experience has made you a better counselor?
For sure. I think anytime I've had any kind of loss, whether it's broken relationships or loss of life or, what have you, that is developed in me an empathy that I don't think would exist without some of that pain and hurt. And I think even just reckoning with the emotion of guilt and knowing that that is a liar, that guilt can really rob us of joy, has also helped me recognize it as a counselor. Like I can see it in somebody else and going, I know you're shitting all over yourself. And they're like, oh my gosh, I am. And I was like, and I want you to see literally what that, like imagine what it looks like if you literally shit all over yourself and take that and go, that's what you're doing. That's how ugly it is when we beat ourselves up. And so, yeah, I definitely feel like that has helped.
Well, I mean, you were talking earlier about how you know what you want, you like to
Right.
get things done.
Right.
And I feel like that's probably tied in with the guilt of like, what did I do that was wrong? Or I didn't
Right.
do
Right.
enough. It's like all of this do.
Exactly. And I see that as a theme, whether it's my brother, that's when I first, I think, recognize that I have a survivor guilt complex, how that's why guilt is easy for me to pick up. Because when I think about what my mom went through throughout her life, what my dad went through, and how I was spared of so much, I had a really great childhood. And, to think that my dad has experienced divorce and abuse and all of these hard things. My mom experienced war and post-war poverty and racial discrimination and national discrimination and just struggle and loss. I'm like, man, I've had it really good. So there's guilt of why did I get it so good? And it's what my parents wanted. They wanted to work hard to spare me and my sister and my brother of any kind of pain. And yet I feel guilty. And I do feel gratitude. I mean, that's at the core what I'm really feeling. But why is guilt still existing in there? It's like survivor guilt that I got to have it good while they had to suffer. And so whenever my brother was born with cerebral palsy, and I remember hearing my parents say, oh, 2 kids, that's a good number. Heard him say it several times just to other people. And, oh, you got 2 kids. That's great. That's a good number. And I thought, my brother was born first, was a healthy baby in utero, but didn't get to have a healthy life outside the womb. And my sister came along, and then it's me, the 3rd child. And so I think there was this seed planted for me, not at all my parents' fault, but more just my nature is to go, wow, if Wesley, who's my brother, it's my brother's name, if he was okay, would I be here? So I got to make this count. Like I've got to make sure that, my life counts. And my parents are the kind that are like, proud of you no matter what. Like, you don't have to perform. There was no vicarious living. They would be proud of me if I said my ABCs when I was 15.
Yeah.
Learned my ABCs at 15. They would be proud of me. They're like extreme in that sense of like no pressure, right? And yet I still had this innate drive. And I think it's because I'm like, my brother didn't really get to make it into this world. I mean, he's alive and all that, but he's not able to live a life like I am. And so I've got to make it count.
That's a lot of pressure.
Right? Right?
I mean, like what it reminds me of is Saving Private Ryan. Have you seen that movie?
Mhm.
You know, the closing scene is this man who like this entire team of people have essentially died for to like get him out of the war. And now he's an old man and he's turning to his wife and saying like, have I been a good man? Like, has my
Yes.
life been worth the sacrifice that all of these people made for me? And have you encountered some sort of moment in film
Oh, yeah.
that's kind of like that, where it's like, oh my gosh, like that's exactly they just named the thing that I experienced.
Completely. Yeah. I think there's been several places, either in TV or film, where that has resurfaced in me and it's allowed me to reprocess, oh, that's what that is. And I would say This Is Us TV show rocked my world, especially the first season, because for those that, haven't seen it, it's like, a woman who has triplets and one of them doesn't make it. And just, I remember it was such a shock to me whenever that happened that I was like sobbing.
Wow.
Sobbing. I mean, like, and it's something that it's like, I have cried tears for my parents, but I'm like, I was like sucking wind, trying to breathe. And I was like, oh my gosh, my parents experienced that. Like, that is the pain of their story. And it's like, I know that's just a TV show, but it's so reflective in so many people's story.
Yeah.
And I'm like, God, I don't know how I don't think they spend a day without thinking about them.
Yeah.
And so, and as a kid, I didn't think much about it, and because it was normal. I was like, oh, we're going to go see Wesley. He's at the hospital or whatever. But it was not until I became a mom, really, and really was like, oh gosh, that's the loss. That's huge.
Yeah.
Huge. Along those same lines of survivor guilt and just reckoning with the pain that it must feel to be a parent. I was 13, so I was in middle school. My dad's twin brother had 2 kids, and I was the baby of pretty much all the cousins. My cousin was 18, and I was 13, and she was literally about to get married. Came and brought her wedding dress to my mom to him, and because my mom was a seamstress. And my mom fixed the wedding dress, all that stuff. And I remember them coming. I was like, oh, I missed them. When did they come? She's like, oh, they were here yesterday. We're going to go take the dress back to Naples, which is where they lived. And we lived in Lakeland, Florida. And then I remember just, days after she dropped the dress off, we find out that she took her life. I was 13. And I remember, like, my dad coming home from work, first time I've ever heard him cry. And he was sobbing in his closet. And I was like, what just happened? And my mom's like, hey, Bethy, can you come out here? And so I went out to the living room and she told me, and she said, I'll never forget what she said. I just went kind of like stone cold face. And I said, I'm never having kids.
Whoa.
And this is a 13-year-old girl who had a pretty carefree life. Of course, I saw some harm and pain. I saw brokenness. My brother, had a broken story, and I knew my parents' story was hard, but I had a pretty beaver cleaver life, right? And I'm 13 years old, and I hear that, and the first statement out of my mouth is, "I'm never having kids." And I look back on it now as an adult, and I know what I told myself. I said, "I'm never going to love like that and lose."
Going back to your story of the guilt that you've grown up with, do you feel like that was also a motivating factor for you to move into psychology and eventually counseling? And because it was like, I need to do something that justifies my life, and therefore I'm going to do the most helpful thing that I know how to do?
Oh, I don't think it was overt. I don't think it was obvious to me.
Yeah.
But for sure, that has to be a motivator, right? But I do think I feel like I've been so blessed. Like I've had so many gifts in my life. I'm like, why wouldn't I want to give that away? And does it help ease a little bit of a guilty conscience? Yeah, but my guilty conscience is really a bit of a lie, because it's like I didn't cause my brother to not have a healthy delivery. I didn't cause the war that my mom endured, or the pain that my dad endured. I didn't cause my cousin's suicide. And so I know that those are all lies, but I do think my gratitude is connected in some ways to the guilt that I have so much. And so whenever I am able to express that gratitude through the work that I do, it does calm that guilty voice.
I think the closest thing that we can relate to is just like JJ has a journey with anxiety.
Beth doesn't know anything about that.
My lips are sealed.
But yeah, she does, but she'll never tell you.
Too late. I already know. I'm too close. Well, one of the tools that JJ has learned is to find the lie, whatever the anxiety is telling her, and then speak the truth to it. And it sounds to me like that's exactly what you just did. Is that like guilt is telling me that I'm responsible for what happened to my brother. Guilt is telling me I'm responsible for what happened to the child that I lost. But the truth is, these are tragedies that happen in spite of me.
Right.
And are there other truths that you speak to yourself?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, what's interesting about guilt is like even when you replay it, when you say it back to me, I'm going, oh my gosh, how arrogant to think that I have anything to do with those big things, right? It's almost like it's not this little humility like, oh, I feel so guilty that I'm so blessed. But it's like, wow, you think awfully highly of yourself, don't you, Beth, if you think that you really have that much power. Obviously, this at the core is my faith. I mean, if I didn't have a God that I serve that I believe is not only sovereign, but also just benevolent and kind and also willing to and able to rewrite the scripts of these dark tragedies and, not cover them up as if they're not valid to grieve, but to say, I'm still at work. Just let me finish my painting, and step back and stop trying to meddle and start saying, oh, I'm so sorry I spilled that paint. It's like, well, I've got it.
There are so many times in life that just feel messy and out of control. But it reminds me of when I'm sewing. So for most of the project, all you're seeing is the messy threads and like the ugly side of the fabric until the very end when you flip it right side out and everything, hopefully, is like neat and tidy and beautiful.
That's a really nice analogy, JJ.
Thanks, Dave.
You're welcome. Well, we're on the home stretch here. The first act of Beth's story begins in the early 1980s, and Raiders of the Lost Ark had just come out. And
Ooh.
JJ, did you know that Indiana Jones almost didn't have that name?
Wasn't it like Dakota Jones or something?
No, it was Indiana Smith.
Oh, it just does not have the same ring to it.
No, and what actually happened is they changed the name on the first day of shooting.
Didn't the director have a dog named Indiana or something? Isn't that how the story goes?
No, in the third movie, they joke that the dog was named Indiana.
Okay,
so
I know that, but I'm gonna look this up on the internet real fast. The character was originally named Indiana Smith after an Alaskan Malamute called Indiana. Oh, a Malamute is a dog. Yes!
You did it. Okay, one other quick little bit of...
Wait, but listen to this.
Okay.
After an Alaskan Malamute called Indiana that Lucas owned in the 1970s, on which he based the Star Wars character Chewbacca.
Wow. George Lucas's dog, Indiana, somehow made his way into 2 films.
Yeah.
That is really impressive. Okay, one last little bit of Indiana Jones trivia. Do you remember that scimitar scene where like Harrison Ford pulls out the gun and shoots the guy?
Yes.
With the sword fighting? They were actually supposed to have a really long sword fight. Like, it was originally choreographed that was what was supposed to happen. Like, they were going to have this big, long sword fight. And Harrison Ford, on the day of shooting, had, like, a stomachache. Like, he had food poisoning or something like that. And so he just pulled out his gun and shot the guy. And it turned out that it was such a great moment that they kept it in the movie.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, as Mr. Jones' dog... As Mr. I can't read this.
Keep reading it, and I'll be your soundtrack.
Okay. I don't know if I can. Oh my gosh! As Mr. Jones dodged poison darts and bad guys, Beth found herself navigating her own perilous experience: elementary school.
Act 1. Suggestions from a friend. Growing up is never easy, but growing up and having a family that's a little different from all the other families at school adds another challenging layer. For Beth, there's a good chance this unique experience was the very thing that led her to the career she loves today. This act includes the lunch line, a good sense of humor, and a vault.
I remember a couple key moments, one in which I was in elementary school, probably 4th grade.
So like 10 years old.
Probably, yeah. And I do remember looking at each other's checks in the lunch line. People going, let me see your check, let me see your check. And they were kind of looking at everybody's names and mom's names, and then they saw my mom's name. And I remember feeling a little bit like wanting to cover her name because I felt like they're going to go, what is that? How do you say that?
And how did you say it?
Well, my mom's name is Yasuko Katsuren, is her first name, maiden name, and then my last name is Bernard, which was my maiden name. And I also have a middle name that's Japanese, and I have so much pride in it now. But at the time when I was young, I remember just having to explain, like, my middle name means azalea or May.
How do you say it?
Satsuki.
Satsuki. Okay.
I just recall them being like Suzuki, like the car. And I could laugh at that now, but at the time when you're like 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, ouch. Okay, is that your only reference is a Japanese-made car? I was just like, I don't want to have to explain yet another difference.
Yeah.
I don't have a mom who has the name Anna Smith.
When you were in the lunch line and you look down and you see your mom's name and then you have that urge to cover her name, I'm assuming that you brought checks many times before that and like had never had that thought
Never
before.
even occurred to me, and primarily because that particular day when we were buying our lunch tickets, the kids were looking at everybody's parents' names. So I do remember covering that and immediately feeling shame for, wow, my mom is like my hero, and I love my Japanese heritage. As a young person, I just felt like, but it's different. They don't know how to say my middle name. They don't know how to say my mom's name. They ask a lot of questions that I don't really know how to answer.
Like what?
Well, like, do you know how to speak Japanese? How do you say my name in Japanese? And all these other things that they expect for me to be both bilingual and fully fluent in the culture, the heritage, which I felt kind of ill-equipped to answer.
Because you grew up as an American, basically.
I did, yeah. My mom did not speak Japanese in the home. I wish she had, because she honestly was trying to still learn the English language. So when she came to the States with my dad, before all of us were born, she wasn't very fluent in English, so she had to learn it. So for her to teach us and also be learning it herself was difficult. I wasn't able to speak in Japanese, and I didn't have a real deep understanding of all the cultural nuances. And at the same time, I was different than my white friends, right?
Do you recall your sister experiencing anything like that?
Yeah, my sister uniquely, she looks more Hispanic and I look more Asian. So it would be funny how if we were out with my dad, they would assume he was either had adopted us or, I mean, we got that a lot of times. Or my sister would be like, are you Hispanic? Are you Latino? Are you, Cuban? Are you Mexican? Because we grew up in Florida, so there was great diversity there. And then for me, it was always, are you Chinese? That seemed to be the traditional, I guess, the most common Asian race that people thought of. I was like, no, I'm Japanese. I'm like, well, what's the difference? So then therein lies
An entire country.
stereotype jokes that at the time when you're young, it doesn't feel good.
As your mom was learning the language, did you ever have to step in as a kind of translator for
Yeah,
her?
that's so funny that you would ask that, because it was so second nature to me and my sister that we would finish her sentences or reiterate what she said without even noticing. So we would be like, let's say me and a friend or me and a friend's mom and my mom are all there. If there's even a moment of pause after my mom says something where I can tell they couldn't understand, it was so instinctual and habitual that it wasn't conscious. I just reiterated what she said. And they're like, oh, and then they respond. And so, yeah, it wasn't like she was asking for a direct translation, but we were doing it naturally. And we laugh about it now because we still do it. Even though she's lived here so long, her accent is so thick that when I see people smiling and nodding, I'm like, they clearly didn't understand what she just said. And then my kids will end up doing the same thing and they, of course, they tease her. Like when she says certain words, they'll tease her about it. And it's just their form of affection. She loves it. She's just like, oh, you stop it. You want me to talk Japanese? I talk Japanese. So she gets on to them all the time.
Wow, it sounds like she has such a great sense of humor about it.
Oh, she's awesome. I mean, if you ask my kids, who's your favorite person on the planet, it's my mom. She just has such a strong sense of self, such a confidence, such a pride, and yet just able to laugh at herself, able to laugh at, I mean, she even says, I know can speak English well, I know can speak my Japanese language well, and then Okinawan, she's from Okinawa, so there's a third language. And she said, I know can speak any well. And I was like, Mom, you can speak 3 languages.
Yeah.
That is incredible. It's not that she feels necessarily insecure as much as it's just she knows how to laugh at those challenges. So,
And you just said she's constantly misunderstood, but it seems like she still has joy. Just what a wonderful thing as a daughter going through adolescence to see that in your mom.
right. I 100% think that is why we did embrace the fact that we were different in such a way that we were proud of it. Yeah, I think we just followed her model without noticing, without her really saying it. There was definitely more caught than taught.
I'm just wondering, your mom didn't speak the language. It meant that you had to really pay a lot of attention, which I wonder if, that plays into the way that you pick up on cues in your counseling.
Huh.
Where, it's just something that came naturally to you and is kind of a byproduct of the relationship that you have with your mom. Have you ever considered something like that?
I did have to be really in tune, really having to listen. I've never thought about that particular connection, but I think that's spot on.
You kind of found yourself in a listening role. Different friends would recommend to other people to talk to you. Was that something that happened in high school, or was it something that happened in college?
Yeah, that was definitely high school. Two other girls were Beth and Mary Beth. So when the three of us were together, like, what are your names? Beth, Beth, and Mary Beth. And they're like, no, really. And we're like, no, really. Yeah, those girls too were really great about trusting me with their story and trusting me with the hardships that they were walking through. And several times I'd be like, you need to be in counseling. You need to be a psychologist. You're so good at this. And it wasn't anything I tried to do. It just was natural. In middle school and high school, even though my natural inclination was towards being the listening ear, being the vault, people would call me, oh, you're like the vault. You can share with you and it's going to stay with you. And college, because I was thinking of career, I was volunteering at a crisis pregnancy center. And one of my friends, one of the Beths, there's Beth, and Mary Beth from junior high. So she's resurfaced and she's my roommate in college.
Okay.
And we're at Auburn together. And she said, she was a volunteer. And she said, Beth, this is up your alley. You've got to do this. I was like, okay. And really respected her and knew she knew me. And so I volunteered. I was like, oh, you're so right. I love this. And so I would walk from campus and walk over there, and basically we were like peer counselors, and we were able to run pregnancy tests, but also just be a support to someone as they were making their decision. And I just was like, wow, this is what it's like. Like, I could actually do this, something like this for a job. That's just being a friend. That's all I'm doing. I can do that. So that was probably the turning point. I was like, what do I need to do a job like this? Well, even going back, if you don't mind going back, as I was telling the story about college, I recalled also in high school, that same Beth said there's this class called peer counseling. And it's one of the elective classes. And so if you remember our senior years, it's like all electives, basically, and a couple final classes. And so I did this peer counseling class, and I loved it. We literally sat around and talked about our feelings and talked about we're there for each other. Then we went and talked about underage drinking and driving and smoking and just trying to really counsel our peers to make wise choices. So that was my first exposure to that.
Did you take that class with Beth?
No, she actually must have taken it the semester before me, but Mary Beth was in that class with me because I was like, girl, come with me. Let's do this together. Let's make it fun.
If not Beth, then Mary Beth.
It was either Beth or Mary Beth. We were together somehow.
Your friend Beth told you about peer counseling and then told you about this volunteer opportunity that lit a fire under you to continue pursuing this. Do you think that you would be a counselor if she hadn't recommended that you try peer counseling?
That's a good question. Maybe not. I mean, because I remember being in the psychology class, and they said that the track for that is 4 years of this, then 2 years of this, then 4 years of this. I'm like, no, thank you. Like, that's no interest to me. I'm not going to be in school for, another 8 years. And so I didn't realize that there was another path. I see now, whenever I think about even those young years of being seen as different versus just being seen as special, I think the way Beth did see me was not different, but just special. You're made for something special like this. And so isn't it interesting how so much of even my career path has been influenced and shaped by someone just believing in me and encouraging me? So I don't know. I mean, that really is, I've never made that connection that there's just a couple suggestions from a friend could have led me down that path. Yeah. Thanks for letting me see that, Dave.
That's my job.
I'm going to call her right now.
All right.
Beth, you changed my
That's
life.
right. That's right.
A lot of our cultural narrative says that in order to have your life change for the positive, you need to win the lottery or a game show or some sort of talent competition. But I love how Beth's story shows that a life-changing moment can come from a comment from a friend who sees your giftings and then gives you a nudge to foster them.
It's crazy to me to think of all the people she's been able to help just because of that one moment when a friend saw potential in her. We're nearly through with the show, but we have one last segment. It's called Let's Rewind the Tape.
Beth is a counselor serving recording artists at Porter's Call.
But she wouldn't have that job if she hadn't agreed to be the office manager first.
But she wouldn't have pursued counseling at all if it hadn't been for 2 perfectly timed suggestions from her childhood friend, Beth.
Not Beth or Mary Beth, just
Beth.
the one Beth.
Yes.
Oh, she's Beth. It was Beth, and Mary Beth.
Yeah, it wasn't herself, Beth.
Right.
It was the other Beth.
There's so many Beths.
You're my Beth's friend, Mary Beth. This episode of Instrumental was produced by me, JJ Heller.
And me, Dave Heller,
Our theme music is my song, Big Love, Small Moments.
that I helped write.
To find out more about me, listen to more of my songs, or watch my music videos, please visit jjheller.com. That's 2 letter J's, HELLER.com.
We'll be back next week with another episode of Instrumental.
So be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Sleeping